Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Mornings on Main for, what month is this? November. Closing out 2020 here. So this is our November Mornings on Main webinar. And we've got Jim Thompson here, which we'll get to in just a second. But while we're waiting for folks, just remind you that all attendees come in listen-only mode. And you can toggle back and forth between your computer or your phone audio if you need to, if for some reason you're having technical difficulties. All of our webinars are being recorded and are archived, so you can go back and view this later if you need to, or share it with others. We do want this to be interactive. Jim's going to do about a 45-minute presentation. But we want questions. So there should be a little question box on your right-hand control panel where you can type in those questions for Jim, and I'll curate those and we'll have a discussion with Jim after the presentation to keep the conversation going. If for some reason we can't get to everybody's questions, there's my email address. You can email me if you have concerns or questions. Also want to remind you that I think I have it set 1 or 2 days after the webinar. You're going to get an email from us thanking you for participating. There's also a poll in that, or a survey in that email. We'd appreciate it if you'd fill that out. A couple of the questions pertain to future topics. So as we're starting to look at 2021's subject matter, those topics would help us kind of get an idea of what you're looking for as we go forward. So I just want to remind you of that opportunity to fill out that survey. And if you've done it in the past, we appreciate it, but we'd like you to do it again. If it would take usually they take about 2 or 3 minutes to complete. So just as a reminder, again, folks are coming in the listen-only mode, and you can toggle back and forth between your audio if you need to. So Gayla, I'm going to turn it over to you to do some announcements.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. As Keith said, what month are we in? So like many of you all, one of the biggest words that we heard through this whole COVID is how we pivoted. And so I remember us sitting around back in March going, what are we going to do? And I cannot believe it's already November. And so we're happy to bring another Mornings on Main to you all. As many of you all know, during this process, we came up with the 4 ways to connect. Our different 4 ways to connect, just as a reminder, we're reaching out and doing We Care calls with all the directors across the state of Missouri on a monthly basis now, a couple of times a month now. And then these Mornings on Main is continuing. And then we also have our COVID resources as well. So don't forget to get plugged into some of those areas also, because you know we're all going, okay, how much longer do we plan this? So we're looking, as Keith said, into next year, continuing these Mornings on Main. They have been very successful for us. We've had great comments, great content, as well as what Jim's going to bring to us today. So just a reminder on the next one. So the next one's December the 2nd, and it will be a check-in on our Main Street retailers. And so that will be a great one right before we continue into the holiday season.
Yeah, and we're still finalizing some of those presenters, but we already have some great ones that have been doing some good stuff through 2020, and we're also going to ask them some questions about what they're expecting for the holiday season. So it should be a good presentation.
Yep. Be great. And then this Friday, hey, you guys cannot miss this. This is our workshop Friday. I just went through, well, yesterday, I went through Jay's slide deck for this presentation. It's amazing. I mean, seriously, it's amazing. I couldn't make enough comments on the side. Jay, the slide is great. But he's just going to bring us a vast amount of tools and tips, not just for retailers and not just for our directors, but as board members and committees, how we can work in our different committees to make for sure that we're maneuvering through this pandemic. And we're going to win on the other side. And so it's just a phenomenal presentation that he's put together for us. I'm very, very excited about it. So
yeah, and Gayla, looking at it, I also think, you know, city planners, city officials, there's going to be some great information in there as they're thinking about, you know, how can we support small business as we continue to go through this pandemic.
Yes, counties and alderman. Jim, I know, was an alderman before, and so this is going to be really good for everyone to be part of.
Yep.
So if you haven't registered.
Yep, it is a long day, but we've got it broken up into some manageable bites. It's just like our normal workshop, quarterly workshops that we do that are a full day. So you're going to get a lot of content, but we also understand sitting in front of a computer all day. So we've built in some breaks, built in some small group discussions, plenty of time for lunch, so you can go grab lunch and don't have to eat it at your desk again. So join us for this presentation. And like Ayla said, Jay's slides do just look amazing. He's gathered a ton of great information from across the country to share with us.
Yeah, it's going to be fantastic. So just to mention also, the evening before, normally when we have our quarterly workshops, we always do a networking event the night before. We have dinner together. We did not want to just slide through straight into our workshop. We still want to get to know everybody. And we want to bring back those familiar faces that we normally spend the evening before our quarterly workshop with. So we are doing a happy hour from 5 to 6 on Thursday evening. So we hopefully, bring your own beverage. We are hoping that you all attend that as well, because we want to see your smiling faces and we want to hear from you, and we don't want it to be all about work.
And you can still register. Just go to our website, momainstreet.org, to do that registration.
All right, so Jimmy T is up. Jim has been helping us in Missouri for years. I remember one of our very first visits was back in Washington, Missouri, where Jim came to help and do a quarterly workshop with us. Jim really feels like part of our team. We even tease Iowa a lot. So Jim is part of the Iowa team, Main Street team there. And one of his immediate people with him, I always tease them, we're going to bring Jimmy T to Missouri someday. You watch out. But Jim has been in many of your all's communities and really helped us move our programs forward. And we're just happy to have Jim Thompson with us again today. So Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you. And if you would give them just a little bit more of your background coming from you and your perspective, that would be great.
Sure, Gayla, thank you. Thank you, Keith. So I've been on the Main Street Iowa team for years, and prior to joining the Main Street Iowa state staff, I was contracted by several states, including Iowa, to do economic development work in communities. And most of that started because I did economic development work as a city council person. We had a strange form of government, and we did not have a city administrator, and so the council, it was a strong mayor council, and so I wore the hat of economic development and really kind of learned all of the tools that we're using today, and it's helped me in my career. So I'm with the state of Iowa. I work for the Iowa Economic Development Authority, so it's a state government position, and I focus on downtown development and real estate, housing. And then because of my past city government work, I've done a lot of work with city councils. I do trainings and creating incentives and doing other kinds of planning programs for them. And it's really been a fun ride working for the state. I also wear a hat of, I'm on the leadership team for the Iowa Rural Development Council and was appointed by our governor to chair a task force for Empower Rural Iowa. It's a joint public-private partnership on how to explore rural. And so even though I work with all 942 towns in Iowa, I'm thrilled to have time to be able to spend time in Missouri and work with you guys too. And frankly, I cannot go to one of your towns without learning something and bringing it home. You guys are doing really great work. I just want to take this moment to really congratulate you and Missouri Main Street Connection. You're truly one of the best programs in the country, and I'm thrilled that you guys have partnered with me and allowed me to work with you. And I think you're doing great work, and you guys need to use and abuse your Missouri Main Street staff. They're there to help you. And I think about, with all the introductions and everything, sometimes with Jay's presentation, and Jay's a good friend of mine, I truly believe that you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes when you get in front of those presentations, you might think, well, yeah, I've heard of that before, but I haven't really instituted it. Now's the time to take this stuff very seriously and figure out, how do we get out of this mess we're in? And that's why I wanted to start with this slide, because every decision that's made at the local level matters. And as soon as you get lulled to sleep that you think that every decision doesn't matter, that's when you get elected officials or sometimes city staff that aren't willing to make decisions. And I just want to remind everybody that not making a decision is a decision, and you can hold your community back by choosing to not decide. And it just drives me nuts. And I think about this time that we're in with the pandemic, and I have countless friends and colleagues that remind me almost daily that I can't wait for 2020 to be over. Now, here's the charge for Main Street. You need to embrace every single day. It's time for you to communicate with your retailers. This is the fourth quarter. Every day matters. It's likely that many of them have been hit hard with loss of sales. Consumer confidence is probably at one of the weirdest times I've ever seen in my career. People don't really know if it's safe to go out even in their own communities sometimes. And so consumer confidence is really rattled, but we have to make sure that retailers are really embracing every day to get every sale that they possibly can. And so please pause a second on getting 2020 over with and moving on to 2021. Think about all the businesses in your districts and how we can really hold them up right now. And I think Shop Local should be a mantra that we're all saying, how can we help our local businesses? And that doesn't always mean in our own town, it might be regionally, but really trying to say, how can we benefit? So I'm going to move through the presentation as quickly as possible. I want to leave time at the end for questions. But really, this is about cultivating economic development. It's about growing that economic development locally. Now, federal government, state government are doing things through CARES Act money and other things, and I think it's wonderful. I love that. Please don't misunderstand. I think all of the assistance really is critical at this important time, but I think no other time in my career has been locally driven economic development is more critical than now. We have to take care of ourselves. If we won't take care of ourselves, no one else will. We're not sitting at the door waiting for a handout. We're saying, can we work together to make a better climate? And that's truly what this is all about. So economic development, what really is the purpose of economic development? And I tried to think a little bit more globally. And it's really about growing population and increasing the economic base. So we need new homes, we need residents, we need jobs for them. And how do we do that? So we're trying to attract new businesses, retain or expand existing businesses. Keep in mind, when we grow our existing businesses, that is really the crux of every economic development program. Recruitment is critical, but sometimes recruitment includes getting an existing business to expand what they're already doing. So growing from within, growing your own, and really then creating those kinds of communities that people want to visit. It's not just about shopping and going home. It's also places that where you want to linger. We talk regularly about if we can keep people on the sidewalks longer. The longer they linger, the more money they will spend. Fact. So when we think about Main Street then, Main Street economic development, when we do our job appropriately, correctly, we're raising the assessed value of all the properties and we're creating parking problems. And it's like, I think about towns that I've worked in and I think where this crux of inappropriate parking happens. And it's almost always a parking management issue, not really a capacity issue. I have worked in communities in Iowa, I will tell you, this didn't happen in Missouri, 2 competing businesses, and this time they happened to be ladies, that when they came to work in the morning, they intentionally parked right at the front door of their competitor so that they would not have that parking stall available. And I think, oh my gosh, when do we figure out that we're stronger together than if we compete by ourselves? But that's a true story. And so we're trying to encourage appropriate rehabilitation of buildings, retaining and expanding businesses. Today, that's more important than ever because businesses are suffering. Some businesses are suffering because of the pandemic, and we really need to focus on what can we do. And if it's time for them to transition, let's help them with that transition. Let's be Main Street facilitators. Let's figure out who's the right person for them to talk to and create those partnerships. And through all of this work, making downtown a magnet. If it's a magnet that people choose to live, choose to shop in, choose to have fun in, maybe even work in, we make a stronger downtown. And it takes all of us pulling in all the same direction to make those things happen. But I want to remind everybody, when we talk about Main Street basics, sometimes it starts with building and business inventories. When we know what we have, then we can try to create and build what we need. I do a lot of disaster work in communities. So I'm the department's appointee for when there's a fire, a tornado, flooding, my phone rings, okay? And I manage a grant program. It's called a Community Catalyst Building Remediation Program. We have about 100 projects on the book, and we've invested about $9 million in 3 years to create that, but only if city government will step up and financially invest in those projects too. I think later on I have a picture of one I'm going to show you that we worked on. But creating a partnership and really figuring out how to work through some of that disaster recovery. Fires are devastating things in downtowns. When we have shared walls like we do, Randy Wilson may have talked about this in his design presentation about the common walls and how when fires happen, it can take half a block. And that's if you have really great fire protection, sometimes even more than that. I've seen devastating fires hit downtowns, and we have to be prepared for those. And yet, when I get on these disaster-related visits, and I sometimes even in Main Street towns, and they can't tell me who the property owner is or who's the business operator in that location, I get really frustrated because that is how we get a seat at the economic development table. Information is king, and we have to really make sure that we're providing the facts, the information that people need that's valuable given those moments. When the tornado hit Marshalltown, it's a mid-sized community, about 30,000 in population. It went right downtown. They had 208 buildings affected by their tornado. And so the first place we had to start was, how do we contact all of these people? And they had a decent idea of who it was, but it absolutely was not complete because they did it several years ago and didn't keep it up. And that's why I say, if you're really going to do economic development in a Main Street district, you have to know who owns and operates all of those businesses and properties. So downtown's a symbol. Whether you want it to be or not, downtown is your symbol. So this is the time that I say, please take off your rose-colored glasses. When I roll into communities that I work with, I try to see them for the first time every time I visit. And when I'm there, I can point out things that, frankly, some of the locals have driven past for days and weeks and months. And I'm asking, why are there so many weeds in front of City Hall? You're setting a terrible example. Shouldn't we lead by example? And it's like, oh, I never noticed all the weeds in front of City Hall. Yeah, maybe we should do something about that. But it is that symbol of economic health in your community. I've worked on countless numbers of recruitment visits for staff. So a school system would interview new school superintendents. and we would do a driving and walking tour, and I've participated in a lot of those. And it's interesting when they see downtown, sometimes that can make or break a hiring decision that really has very little to do with their profession, but has everything to do with why they want to choose the town that they live in. So it's so important that we understand. That leads us to the partnerships between private and public sector. Businesses, as a old Main Street, former, I should say, Main Street director, we got a lot of our funding from industrial clients because they knew that it helped them with recruitment. And so they wanted Main Street to be strong. And so they partnered with us, not just with cash. Cash is always awesome, but they also gave us very quality volunteers, committee members, and or board members that worked. And we took full advantage of that. The local quality of life is what sometimes gets overused, but if you don't love your town, you need to move somewhere that you do love, because life is way too short. When you love your town, it shows every time. And if you can't get volunteers to demonstrate how much they love their town, it's really a sad commentary, because I would have to really question if community members wouldn't volunteer to make this a better place. Is this a community that I really want to invest in also? It's about that local pride, the pride in place, really saying I'm proud of the place that I live, and I really want everyone to be part of this recruitment effort. So it does reflect a healthy downtown reflects a healthy community. It can be that great incubator for small business. So when we, as Main Street programs, I talked earlier about investing in appropriate rehab. I love businesses that operate in cool buildings, but just understand the buildings are likely to be there longer than any business that occupies them. And so if we can really focus on quality, appropriate rehabilitation, and then counsel and work with the businesses that operate out of those great buildings, then it can be that great incubator. It does reduce sprawl. I'm going to talk housing a little bit at the end, and I think about all the towns that I work with that want to do the bright, shiny new subdivision on the edge of town, that they have to do a greenfield development and extend all of the utilities, streets, water, sewer, telecommunications, and it's very, very expensive. And at the same time, I'm going through that building and business inventory, realizing that about 25% of their upper stories are occupied or could be occupied. And I think about how we have to really watch our priorities. This is easy space to develop, and today more than ever in history, people are choosing to live in upper story downtowns. When we do market analysis work in Iowa, we survey the heck out of them. And one of the questions that we ask regularly is who would like to live in an upper story apartment? And we do cross tabulations by demographics, and every town that I've ever done market analysis in, the demographic that is the highest to choose who wants to live downtown are 50 years old and older. Everybody wants to say it's young professionals, and I love young professionals. It's a great opportunity to get them there, but really the market can be empty nesters also, and we really need to take full advantage of that. It will protect property values and public investment. So cities and Main Street programs need to work together on how to maximize property development to get the best businesses to operate out of them. So Main Street is economic development within the context of historic preservation. This gets drilled into us, but appropriate rehab is really the goal of every Main Street program. And yet, I'll show you pictures in a little bit, I roll into towns where they've just totally screwed up buildings in inappropriate rehab for all the wrong reasons, and yet our ethic is economic development through historic preservation. So we really have to walk the talk and make sure that we're telling them exactly what we want and demonstrating that every day. So the themes for now and beyond are really fostering entrepreneurs. Through that building and business inventory, and yes, I am going to reference that several times through this presentation. So frankly, you just need to deal with that. But as COVID and pandemic vacancies are happening, and I'm seeing them also, really trying to demonstrate that we want to fill that space is critical. The best marketing tool that still exists today and likely always will is word of mouth. But if we don't talk about it through social media and all of our avenues of communication, that there's available property that needs to be filled, because there are entrepreneurs sitting at home tonight having dinner with their family that are saying, you know, someday I'd really like to own a bar or a restaurant or open my own specialty store. And unless we get that word out, we're never going to reach them. So place matters. How we can rearrange businesses and get the biggest bang for our buck also is critical. Partnerships, we have to take advantage of every partnership. One of the best skills that an executive director at a Main Street program can have is really facilitating and delegating who is the best partner for them to work with on every kind of venture. I have leaders are made. Actually, I'd like to amend this. I think leaders are doers. And I'd also like to say doers are leaders. If your leaders aren't doers, then they're really not leaders. They're figureheads, and they're not necessarily being an effective leader. And so we really need to remind, especially our boards and committees, that we're do groups. We have to figure out what we want to do, have it all go through a vetting process, and then we need to do it. Sometimes we have to quit talking and start doing to implement some of the best things that we have going in our communities. And philanthropy is real. People want and choose to give back to their towns. We have to not be bashful about asking them, how do you want to give back to your town, and what can we do to make that happen? I am not going to spend a lot of time on the cost of a building. Just like we've shared in the past, we brought in a national economist to talk to us about all of the lost revenue that happens when we have an empty building. And I want to say a very technical term, duh. If we get caught up in that and we think for a second that a fully functioning occupied building isn't bringing us more revenue than a vacant underutilized building, we need to start again. Go back to step one and figure out how do we become an effective Main Street community, because this is ridiculous. We need to encourage and recommend a quality return on investment from fully occupying vacant space. Upper story housing, exactly the same thing. We know based on consumer spending that they're going to spend, based on how they spend their money, $20,000 to $40,000, $50,000 a year. We know they're going to spend that money. We just don't know where they're going to spend it. So if we encourage upper story housing and we don't have places for them to spend their money on the first floors, then they are going to drive to where they can. It might not even be in your town. And so working on this holistically to really recruit housing and get quality retail down below is critical. This is a must for communities. It's the only way to really get that quality return on investment. This is what I see when I roll into a lot of towns. And so one of the tools that we've been using, and I did a lot of research with other states, and we have now in Iowa an approved vacant building registry and hopefully Missouri has examples of this too. But what it really does is says you get to decide what happens when a building becomes vacant. In the examples that I have, and I'm more than willing to share if you want best practices, if a building is vacant for 3 months, you're required as a property owner to go into City Hall and register it. Yes, you have to pay a registration fee. It's generally a nominal fee. It's $25 or $50 to say, yes, my building is vacant. The goal is we want to get buildings occupied. But here's the catch. If it's still vacant 6 months from now, then you have to register it again, and you have to allow us as a city access to your property for building officials. And we get to walk through and make sure that we're protecting the neighbors adjacent to a vacant building. I love this piece. Now, when we talk about incentives, we're going to talk about carrots and sticks, incentives or ordinances. I prefer carrots to really encourage people to do the right thing, but sometimes some property owners require us to really get serious about creating ordinances that don't allow them to do what they do. And so what I generally recommend with communities is a two-part system. A minimum maintenance ordinance that says you must keep it to this minimum standard. That is never going to get you to appropriate rehab, but at least it's a start. You can't board up windows, you can't leave them unrepaired, you can't leave roofs leaking, okay? Then partnering that with this vacant building registry, the coolest part about a vacant building registry is you get to define what is vacant. And that's where it's gold. You get to decide if a building isn't open regular public hours, it's vacant. If a building is used for storage, whether on the first floor or the second floor, it's vacant. If you want to discourage, okay, I gotta preface this a little bit. I rolled into this very small rural town and I saw this really cool building. And then I realized, in this case, it was a man cave. And it's never open to the public, and only this gentleman and his friends are allowed to go in there. They go in and tinker, they solve world problems, drink coffee or whatever, maybe based on the time of the day, but it's a man cave. Now, guess what? That hurt the properties on either side of it, because now there's this inherent void in the sidewalk space that sometimes consumers choose not to pass those voids. So we have to make sure that we work harder to be able to get them past those opportunities. But this is what I see, and it's frustrating to me to see those kinds of things. The internal influences, sorry for all the words, but I wanted to cover everything that I wanted to hit with this. I see Main Street programs that aren't really engaged. They're not working effectively with their partners, city government, or other businesses or industry or educational institutions in a town. I see inactive committees. Oh, we've decided that we're not going to do the design committee this year because it's just way too much work. That's a true story, and I can't believe that happens. And you can't be accredited if you're not working on all 4 points. The inappropriate techniques and materials that are used. In that bottom right-hand corner where they've reduced the size of the windows because they thought for whatever reason that would save them some electricity, upgrading their HVAC would have saved them a whole lot more money and getting it modern, but instead they decided to block up the windows and go to Menards and buy the Menards special. I don't hate Menards, they're there for a purpose, but not for downtown. Neglecting and deferring maintenance, we call this demolition by neglect. So you may have those slumlords or other property owners that are hard to deal with. That's why instituting some of these other ordinances might be necessary to get their attention, to be able to work through those process. I talked about the windows, the obsolete, unattractive or lack of signing. I cannot believe when I roll into some towns and I say, oh, here's this business, and they say, oh, well, that was the business 2 times ago. We just think that's a really cool historic sign, and so we don't want to take it down. And I'm saying, oh my gosh, Iowa has a law in the books that if you go out of business, you have to have your signs down in 6 months. And yet, some towns are allowing that to happen for years to come. Not maximizing the income producing potential of a building. So sometimes retailers downtown need to follow some of the best practices of the big box stores, and I want to specifically pick on places like Target and Walmart. They're generally leasing space to other entities, whether it's a Subway or an optometrist or other kinds of entity. We can do that same kinds of thing in our 2,000 square foot retail store. Is there a corner that you could encourage somebody to come in and co-locate with you and bring in their product, have them assist you with some of the hours and work with you, and maybe touch a little different market segment than you generally have coming through your door? It goes directly to your bottom line and gives you exposure to a whole new customer base. And then I think about not leading by example. Main Street programs, look at your offices. Are you setting the bar high? City governments, your partnership with them, are they really taking care of their property? I recently worked in a town that they decided to move City Hall out of downtown. And it was hard for me not to feel like they were giving up on their community. And so paying attention to how that works is critical to where we go into the future. And all of these are things that we control internally. This is what I see when I roll into some towns on the right-hand side. That's the same building that was the bottom right in the store. And through a small grant that we were able to provide this community, look at what's possible with this building. It is fully occupied. The 2-bedroom apartment on the front side of the upstairs. In this town, less than 700 people gets $800 a month. They thought I was nuts when I recommended that they really push the envelope when they marketed this property. And they had to call me back, and it was really funny. They wanted to share that they have a waiting list now on that apartment. What's right behind this apartment is space for 2 more upper story apartments that you can enter from the rear. And so they walked to the bank and said, can we get a construction loan to work on those? And so they're now working on their second apartment. And as it's completed and occupied, their plan is to go back to the bank then and get a loan as cash flow allows to be able to do the third apartment. The downstairs is fully occupied, it's signed. You can see exactly what's going on. And the interesting part with that first floor and that image on the right, that slip cover that they put on there actually encapsulated what you see. Yes, they did improve it slightly and they fixed it up, but that encapsulated what was already there. And it's amazing to me what already exists in communities, and we have to be brave and partner with them because there are unexpected expenses that happen on every one of these projects. This is a real estate project that we worked in through a Catalyst program in Dyersville, another small town just a hair over 4,000. This was in their downtown district, but it's really a manufacturing building. In the late 1950s, Gayla, you're not old enough to know this one, but Doris Day did a musical called Pajama Game. And it was a huge hit. It came from Broadway and then was made into a motion picture that Doris Day starred in, and it all started in this building. So tons of history where they used to sew pajamas in this building. And so the city got together. The city was really the one that instituted this with our communication and said, we want to fix up this area. Not only do we want to fix up this area, but there's great development potential behind this. And so the planned development project was critical because it wasn't going to happen unless this building was rehabbed. They had recruited a brewery that wanted to come to town, and that is what the exterior of the building looks like today. They completely brought it back to as close as original intent as they could. They used as many of the existing features that they could from the original warehouse floor. They also used them for their tappers, which I thought was really, really cool. And then this is a shot of their business and how it occupies. So directly behind this is now a $10 million residential development where they've been able to recruit market rate apartments to go adjacent to this and created a green space between the brewery and the planned development. And it's going to be critical to this town, and it will truly explode with population. People are wanting to go there. Dyersville, if you know much about Iowa history, Field of Dreams. Is this heaven? No, it's Iowa, and now people can actually live in the same town where the Field of Dreams exists today. Identifying partners is critical, and I want to start with things like the small business development centers. Main Street directors truly have to be great facilitators. You don't have to be great at everything. So your board of directors or committees, committee chairs, and your executive director may not be great at things like business plans or reviewing financials or the best financing tools for these businesses or properties that want to develop. But let's call on our partners that exist and really connect with them. Regionally, I think there's other kinds of things. We've worked with Moberly on some of their economic development tools that they've operated with, but getting the city, I didn't put the county on here, but I really think the county's critical to this message too, whether it's the chamber, local economic development groups, energy providers, but I also included service clubs. Through our Community Catalyst program, we allow in-kind donations to count as match toward a grant. And people looked at us cross-eyed like, why in the world would you count in kind? And we wanted to do anything possible to lower the construction costs, even if it's a volunteer bringing it in. And so in one of our smallest towns, they were 700 in population, about the same size as Stanton was in that other picture. They brought in their Lions Club, and the Lions Club did economic development in-kind work for a property owner. They hauled away construction debris. The city paid for the dump truck and hauling it to the landfill, but the service club provided sweat labor to be able to get this project, and it really helped them get through what they needed to get through for the rehab process. Engage with your businesses, really create that business visitation. Now is a critical time. You might not always be able to do this in person, but find a way. Pick up the phone, text them, figure out what's the best way to communicate with every single business in your district so that you can get a gauge on what's really going on from the current business climate, how's their business going, create that relationship with them so that you can really grow their business and perhaps others because they're doing so well. The best businesses want to locate next to other best businesses. There's value-added services, so networking with them, creating retail activities. Now's a great time in the fourth quarter to really focus on co-op marketing and advertising. What's the next best thing, Facebook Live or whatever you're going to use to get that information out. But work on what other kind of business assistance or incentives. The incentives that I've always created with towns started with conversations with property owners and businesses on what do you really need? And so I had in my hip pocket, before we even drafted what was going to be a new incentive, I had properties that I knew wanted to take advantage of these kinds of skills. So working through that. Now remember, owning a building might be their business. So don't be bashful about working with property owners. Yeah, we know sometimes the best building is owned by the biggest jerk in town. Well, that's unfortunate, but that does happen. And so it's not the building's fault. It's what can we do to transition that to an owner that really wants to do appropriate rehab with that so that we can get full utilization of that building footprint. When you have a two-story building and you're only occupying the first floor, you're giving away half of the potential revenue. On those 100 catalyst projects that I talked to you about that I manage, 90 of them have upper story housing as a component to those. In almost every case, the housing upper story was easier to lease than the first floor. So we need to get serious about upper story development. incentives. I love the chapter 353 that you guys have available in Missouri. It's a great tool, and I'm anxious to see how that works. When we were just in Fayette not so long ago, utilizing the sales tax and the property tax portions of this, it was going to bring in approximately $200,000 for their district and community. And I think what a great tool. I wish we had that in Iowa, but stressing new use of incentive dollars so that you can do entrepreneurial startup or business expansion or recruitment, sometimes creating revolving loan funds. Partnering with banks is a great way to do this. I talked about upper story residential and facade improvements, but utilizing all the tools that you have available to you. So sometimes window displays can also be considered an incentive. I want you to get serious about thinking, how can we assist some of the buildings and businesses that are there? If they're vacant, can we do things that really attract people to them? If they're occupied, can we bring more people through their door? And so creating new and fun ways of getting attention to properties. Sometimes though, it's really all about washing the windows and getting access to get rid of the dirt. I was recently in a town where it had a traditional courthouse square, and one entire block of that courthouse square was vacant, and the windows look like it. It was so unattractive. How could you ever recruit anything to those businesses? So sometimes simply as just washing windows makes a difference. These are things that you can do to generate leads, and I love this. Really talk about ways to occupy space. That's the critical thing. If you know through market analysis or other kinds of consumer surveys what you really need in town, tell people. This is another way to get their attention. I always wanted to do a toy store, so let's figure out how to do that. Randy Wilson would have talked to you about Potato Head and the components of a building, and this is really true. Facade mini grants are a great way to partner with cities, counties, sometimes other institutions on how to fix things. If you can't do the entire facade, pick one segment that you're going to focus this year and say, we're really going to work on awnings this year so that we clean up our town and make it look really good, or windows or whatever it is. But this is a critical priority. This was a building, so talking about facade improvements that we worked on in a very small town, 1,500 people in Iowa. It's the Senior Citizen Center, and it was completely blocked in, and they actually liked it this way because it kind of isolated them from the street. Through a small grant, we were able to open it up, and it looks great. And furthermore, one of my pet peeves is the door on the left is actually a residential door on a commercial building. A huge pet peeve of mine. Residential windows and doors do not belong in downtowns. And then working on appropriate rehab, and the senior citizens now love it. And they actually now serve as kind of quasi sidewalk police because they're there watching everything that happens in the downtown. These are two tools that I think are really outstanding from Joplin and from Chillicothe. The cool thing with business improvement or starting business guides is start where you are or where you need to be. It doesn't always have to be an 8 or 12 page document. If it's a 1-page front and back that really works for your town and that's where you're at, start there, get it done, and let's work through that, get the important things. But having one is critical. Not having one is really not appropriate. This is a quick thing about housing because we've heard all these acronyms, NIMBYs, not in my backyard, or CAVES, Citizens Against Virtually Everything. But in my housing work, it's really gone to some newer ones. So notes are not over there either. So they want housing, but they want to choose where it goes. But my favorite is still bananas. It's build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. And that goes everything against Main Street principles of how we want to get the greatest return on investment and full occupation of our square footage. So really trying to figure out appropriate housing can be that upper story housing. Quantifying housing needs generally is a tough thing because you have to start with what you have. So now we're back to building and business inventory. But how you track somebody that might someday choose to move to your town is extremely difficult. So having the appropriate inventory is really the critical first step. These are salaries of people that are already working in your towns. And so we know that based on these salaries, they can afford $750 to $1,000 a month rent based on federal guidelines. And we need to make sure that they have appropriate housing. When they can't find housing in your town, they might work in your town, but get housing in the next town over. If that happens, many times, as soon as there's a job opening where they live, they move there. So housing is a critical economic development tool and critical to downtown economic development. So all the risks are economic. When we don't get full utilization, we're not getting that return on investment, and we have to fight for those kinds of things. So in closing, if you want to find reasons why this stuff won't work, you can, because there are naysayers out there that say this won't work and it's not acceptable. We have to be better than this. So keys to success are really maintaining the support of business owners, property owners, and the city, the community, connecting with all the potential partners, and then working on those domino or catalytic projects that really get you out of your silos, and really, when you do this project, it will drive to the next project. And then I created, and I amend this regularly. So if you guys want to send me what you think are the most successful things that communities need to do, but I think having pride in your community, be willing to invest in the future, figuring out a way that decision making isn't sitting around a table with old white guys like me making all the decisions, that we can get full utilization of the community demographics that live in a community. And that means socioeconomic, it might be gender-based, age, all of those, really making sure that we're a diverse decision-making body. Creatively, then developing those new economic opportunities, supporting your local businesses. I feel like that's something that gets overused, but we have to be critical, and every business needs to earn this every day. It's not an entitlement state. You don't go somewhere just because they're in your town. You go there because they earn your business. There is a deliberate leadership transition process that you're going through, support for your education and education system, strong presence of traditional institutions. Bankers need to be partners, and we need to make sure that they're working for it. Go outside if you need to, and steal all the really good, so R&D and Main Street World, I'm sure you guys know this, rip off and duplicate, but really steal the best ideas and work through those and be positive about how we can really make this stuff happen. So I talk a long time. I'm hoping that there's some questions, Keith.
Hey, Jim, thank you.
Hey.
Yes. And in fact, I'll give folks time to type in some questions. I do have a couple here, and one, I do want to remind folks that this is being recorded, and so the link to that video will be shared later today or tomorrow. You'll get an email from us, and there will be a link in it with the video also. But all of our past webinars are recorded and in our library that you can reach on our COVID resource page on our website. Jim, a lot of great information. I mean, when you talk about economic development, all the things you mentioned are those things that we in communities need to focus on. And, you know, to some of our Main Street folks that have been doing this for a while would probably say that, you know, okay, those are the givens, you know, we need to do those, but realizing that most of them aren't doing all of those things. You've got to set the stage, you've got to have a good foundation. And so, you know, that building and business inventory, we talk about that a lot, but you're right, you know, it has many different facets to it. If it's, you know, a new entrepreneur, new business owner looking for a business, if you don't have that at your ready, you're already behind the game. If you don't know some details about the business or the building, the property owner, how many square feet it is, all those sorts of things that are going to help you be ahead of the game whenever those leads come your way, you're not going to be able to compete very well. Understanding and knowing your partners and what's available. So, you know, while it's the basics, those are the things that are the most important. And
Well,
so, go ahead. Yep.
I was just going to say, Keith, so one of the things that's been really cool in my travels lately is as businesses have had to close and those vacancies are starting to pop up once in a while. What I love is the opportunity for pop-up businesses to occupy that space. It may not be somebody that wants to sign a 5-year lease, but they're willing to be there for a month or two through this fourth quarter. And it really adds to the interaction on the sidewalk then and helps the other businesses. So being ready to allow pop-up businesses is a critical component.
Yeah, well, and I was going to ask you, you touched on it just a little bit with micro business, and we're hearing that a little bit more from the context that you mentioned, which is renting space in your building. But there's also the context of micro business, and I believe Randy and maybe even Jay has talked about this on previous webinars, is taking that huge space that you may have with your traditional downtown building that is, wide but really long, and chopping it up a little bit and having the first, maybe the first third be for a micro business and the back 2/3 be for something that doesn't need street front access. And you've talked about that before, and are you seeing that being utilized through this time?
I am, and what's so cool is when you get into that mindset, it really stretches your imagination. So there are home-based businesses or somebody that's operating out of their basement or garage, or somebody that's a farmer's market vendor that really would like to have additional exposure. It's a great way to do it. And wouldn't it be nice if we could incubate that business with a small start like that and grow into a storefront? Right. That's what would really be the success.
Well, and that's the other question I get asked a lot, Jim, is about business incubators. And, I don't see a lot of them. We do have a community or two that has had some success in something like that. What are you seeing on the business incubation side?
Generally, what I'm saying is really more community initiated development and those. And so they tend to be a little bit more tech or technology based a little bit. Great, it adds a lot of traffic, but we're starting to see a few more retail incubators. I have one building owner in a town, Washington, Iowa. It's called The Village. They have 5 retailers inside of one store. So when you go in, it's all shared merchandise. Now they have their own distinct areas, but I help them with their business plan. And I can tell you that property owner is cash flowing that property better than it would if it was leasing it to one business.
Great. Yeah, we had Trenton, Missouri do that. The Main Street program opened a retail incubator space and ended up transitioning it into private ownership, which while it still remains a retail incubator space, now it's being run by a private individual. And so it was an interesting transition to watch. So Jim, I have a couple questions that are related to buildings, of course, and you talked about this just a little bit, but how do you get owners that live outside the community to improve their buildings? How do you deal with residences on the first floor? How do you get property owners that have disinterested heirs? So all kind of related to that property ownership, and how do you get them to improve their buildings or rent their spaces?
Sure. Absentee owners are really frustrating. And generally, we try to work through that through patting them on the back first. But that's when I really think an ordinance has to be put in place that really requires them to do certain things. I don't love doing that, but please understand, if you're going to put an ordinance on the books, it does you absolutely no good if you're not going to enforce it.
Yeah. And
so enforcement is critical. It's a great partnership effort. If the Main Street program says that big bad city did this and you should be ashamed of themselves, right? That's not a partnership.
Right.
Same thing is true. First floor residential. I have plenty of examples of how to make sure that you don't allow that. We have softened a little bit, okay? And we allow it on the back 50% of a property in some of the towns. And that hasn't been a huge issue with us. We just don't want it on the storefront side.
Right.
What we regularly see is it creates that consumer barrier. They won't walk past those. Once they go residential, they rarely ever go back to commercial. And so that's a really, a death sentence for a property is making first floor residential.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to, you focused a lot on housing this morning, and that goes back to a couple issues. I mean, in many of the rural communities you deal with in Iowa, we deal with here in Missouri, there is a housing issue. There's not enough housing for the folks that need it. And so, if you're looking to attract new entrepreneurs to your community, they are going to need a place to live. And so if there aren't housing opportunities, they might go somewhere else. Or your local entrepreneurs that want to start their own business, they may need to sell their house for some equity to do that business. But if they could buy a building downtown and have housing in that building and their business in that building, as the building was originally built in many cases, that's a win-win on both regards.
Well, and I love owner-occupied housing in the upper story too. That's when you have the nicest finishes. And
Yep.
remember, when you're going to do lease space, renters generally look like what you charge. And I'm not talking about gentrification here. I'm talking about don't devalue your own property.
Right.
If you're going to charge $300 a month, those renters are going to look like that.
Yep. Jim, one last question. Someone asked about opportunity zones in rural areas, and are you seeing those? I know there's been a lot of talk about opportunity zones. I'm not hearing much about them recently. So what are you hearing in Iowa and in your work?
We're getting a little bit of traction, but only when it's investors from Iowa that want to reinvest in Iowa. Opportunity zones have really been better on either coast, where they could draw nationwide investment, sometimes worldwide investment into some of those areas. We're getting a handful of those, and frankly, we're trying to figure out, and as one of our legislative priorities this year, how could we enhance Iowa's stance on opportunity zones? Federal is federal, and we know how they work, but is there a way for us to figure out a way? And I would encourage Missouri to consider those things too, because in the Midwest, I think we have to understand the big investment dollars tend to always go to where the highest property values are, and they're on the coast.
And I would probably add to that, I've seen a little bit in the bigger city centers, utilizing opportunity zones, but it's tougher to make it work in rural.
It is. It's harder.
Awesome.
Great job, Jim.
Yes, thank you very much.
It's good to see you guys. I wish I could see all the other faces too, but thanks for doing this. It was great.
Well,
Kayla,
we really appreciate you.
Yep. Kayla, do you want to end us up here?
Sure. But yes, Jim, thank you so much. We ran out of time because we had some more questions, but if you need those answered, for sure, contact Jim or contact us, and we'll be happy to push those forward. So thank you so much, Jim. We really appreciate you. Great neighbor to Iowa. So so many of your communities represent our communities in the way of size, and what's going on in your all state is a lot of the same things that's going on in ours. So we really appreciate it. We hope to see many of you on Friday as we come back together to have our quarterly workshop, and would love to see you Thursday evening for happy hour as well.
Great. Guys, have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.